The summer heat was beating down hard that Tuesday afternoon as three teenage boys walked slowly down Maple Street. Their basketball shoes made soft sounds on the hot pavement, and sweat still dripped from their faces after 2 hours of practice. At the community center, the oldest boy, Trevor, bounced his worn basketball while talking about the game they'd just finished. His two friends, Kyle and Antonio, listened and laughed as they made their way home through the quiet neighborhood. This wasn't the fancy part of town. Most of the houses here were small and old, with chain-link fences and cars that had seen better days parked in narrow driveways. But it was their neighborhood, and they knew every corner, every shortcut, and every friendly face they might meet along the way. As they turned onto Oak Avenue, something caught Trevor's attention. About 100 yards ahead, a shiny black car sat on the side of the road with its emergency lights blinking. The car looked completely out of place in their neighborhood. It was the kind of expensive sedan you'd see in downtown business districts or wealthy suburbs, not here among the modest homes and apartment buildings. "Look at that car," Kyle said, pointing ahead. "That thing probably costs more than my mom makes in 2 years." The three boys slowed their pace, curious about what was happening. As they got closer, they could see an older man standing beside the car, looking frustrated and checking his phone repeatedly. He was wearing a nice dark suit despite the heat, and even from a distance they could tell he wasn't from around here. "Looks like he's got car trouble," Antonio observed, always the most practical of the three friends. Trevor's mother had taught him to be careful around strangers, especially in situations like this. She'd told him stories about people who pretended to need help just to cause trouble. But something about this scene felt different. The man looked genuinely upset and helpless, not dangerous. As they walked closer, they could see the problem clearly. The front passenger tire was completely flat, and the expensive car was tilted awkwardly to one side. The man was now looking under the car as if hoping the tire might magically fix itself. "We should help him," Trevor said quietly to his friends. Kyle looked uncertain. "I don't know, man. My dad always says to mind our own business when it comes to strangers." But Antonio was already walking toward the car. "Come on, it's just a flat tire. We know how to change those." The man looked up as the three teenagers approached. His face showed surprise and maybe a little worry. He was probably in his 60s, with gray hair and kind eyes behind expensive glasses. His suit was wrinkled from the heat, and there were small drops of sweat on his forehead. "Excuse me, sir," Trevor called out politely. "Do you need some help with your tire?" The man straightened up and studied the three boys for a moment. "Oh, well, I was trying to call for roadside assistance, but my phone can't seem to get a good signal here." "We can help you change it," Antonio offered with a friendly smile. "It's not too hard if you have a spare tire and the right tools." The man looked surprised by the offer. "That's very kind of you boys, but I wouldn't want to trouble you. And honestly, I'm not sure I have all the right equipment." "Let's take a look," Kyle said, warming up to the idea. "Pop your trunk and we'll see what you've got." The man hesitated for a moment, then pressed a button on his key fob. The trunk opened with a soft click, revealing a spotless interior with a small spare tire, a jack, and a lug wrench neatly organized in their proper places. "Perfect," Trevor said, rolling up his sleeves. "This won't take long at all." What happened next showed the difference between these three friends and many other teenagers their age. Without being asked, they organized themselves into an efficient team. Antonio positioned the jack while Kyle began loosening the lug nuts on the flat tire. Trevor rolled the spare tire into position and made sure they had all the tools they needed. The man, who had introduced himself simply as Mr. Richardson, watched in amazement as the boys worked. He tried to help, but they politely insisted he stay out of the way to keep his nice clothes clean. "Where did you boys learn to do this?" Mr. Richardson asked as he watched them work with practiced efficiency. "My uncle taught me when I was 12, Trevor explained while helping Kyle pull off the flat tire. "Said every man should know how to change a tire and check his oil." "My dad's a mechanic," Antonio added, carefully lining up the spare tire. "I've been hanging around his shop since I was little." Kyle didn't say much about his own experience, but his confident handling of the lug wrench showed he'd done this before too. As they worked, Mr. Richardson found himself impressed not just by their mechanical skills, but by their attitude. They weren't showing off or acting tough like some teenagers might. They were simply three young men who saw someone who needed help and decided to provide it. The boys talked easily among themselves as they worked, joking about their basketball practice and making plans for the rest of the week. Mr. Richardson listened to their conversation and learned that Trevor was starting his senior year and hoping to get a scholarship to college. Kyle was working a part-time job at a grocery store to help his family with bills. Antonio was the youngest, but already talking about following in his father's footsteps as a mechanic. Within 20 minutes, the flat tire had been replaced with the spare, and the boys were tightening the last lug nut. They worked with the kind of teamwork that comes from years of friendship and shared experiences. "There you go, Mr. Richardson," Trevor said, standing up and wiping his hands on an old rag Antonio had pulled from his backpack. "That spare should get you where you need to go, but you'll want to get a new tire as soon as possible." Mr. Richardson looked at his car, now sitting level and ready to drive, then at the three teenagers who had rescued him from what could have been a very difficult situation. Their clothes were now dirty. Their hands were covered with grease and dust, but they were smiling like they'd just done the most natural thing in the world. "I don't know how to thank you, boys," he said, reaching for his wallet. "Please let me give you something for your trouble." "No, sir, that's okay," Trevor said quickly, and his two friends nodded in agreement. "We were glad to help." Mr. Richardson looked surprised. "Are you sure? You've saved me a lot of time and trouble." "We're sure," Kyle said. "Anyone would have done the same thing." But Mr. Richardson knew that wasn't true. He'd been stranded for almost an hour before these boys came along, and several other people had driven past without stopping. These three teenagers had not only stopped to help a stranger, but they'd refused payment for their good deed. "Well, at least tell me your names," Mr. Richardson said. "I'd like to know who my good Samaritans are." "I'm Trevor, and this is Kyle." "And Antonio," Trevor said, shaking the older man's hand. "And you live around here?" "Just a few blocks away," Antonio answered, pointing down the street. Mr. Richardson made a mental note of their names and the general area where they lived. Something about these three young men had made a strong impression on him, and he had a feeling this wouldn't be the last time their paths would cross. After helping him put the flat tire and tools back in his trunk, the boys said goodbye and continued their walk home. Mr. Richardson got in his car and drove away, but he kept thinking about the encounter. In his 62 years of life, he'd met many people, but it had been a long time since he'd encountered such genuine kindness from strangers, especially from young people who clearly had very little money but were rich in character. The three friends walked the rest of the way home, talking about their basketball game and their plans for the evening, completely unaware that their simple act of kindness had just set in motion a chain of events that would change their lives forever. The next day started like any other Wednesday for Trevor, Kyle, and Antonio. The summer sun was already hot by 10 in the morning, and the three friends had made plans to spend the day at Trevor's house. His mom worked double shifts at the hospital, so they had the small house to themselves most days during summer break. Trevor's driveway wasn't much to look at. The concrete was cracked in several places with weeds growing through the gaps. An old basketball hoop stood at one end, its rim slightly bent from years of aggressive dunking attempts. But for the three friends, it was their favorite hangout spot. They'd been shooting hoops for about an hour when Kyle noticed something strange. "Hey, check out that car," he said, pausing mid-shot and pointing down the street. A large black SUV was driving slowly through their neighborhood. The vehicle looked brand new with tinted windows so dark you couldn't see inside. It was the kind of car you'd expect to see carrying important business people or maybe even celebrities, not cruising through their modest neighborhood where most people drove older sedans and pickup trucks. "Probably just someone who got lost," Antonio said, dribbling the basketball while keeping one eye on the approaching vehicle. But the SUV didn't drive past like a lost driver would. Instead, it slowed down even more as it approached Trevor's house, then came to a complete stop right in front of their driveway. The three boys stopped playing and stared. In their neighborhood, when an expensive car showed up unexpectedly, it usually meant one of two things. Either someone was in trouble with the law, or bad news was coming. Either option made them feel comfortable. "Should we go inside?" Kyle whispered, suddenly feeling nervous. Trevor shook his head. "Let's just see what happens. Maybe they're looking for directions or something." The SUV sat there for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds. The engine was so quiet they could barely hear it running. Finally, the driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall and well-dressed, wearing a dark suit despite the summer heat. He looked to be in his 40s with short black hair and the kind of confident posture that suggested he was used to being in charge. Most importantly, he didn't look like police or anyone who might bring bad news. The man closed his car door and walked slowly toward the three teenagers. His movements were calm and professional, like someone who was used to dealing with important situations. "Good morning," he said in a polite voice as he approached. "Are you the young men who helped Mr. Richardson yesterday with his car trouble?" The three friends exchanged quick glances. They remembered the older man with the flat tire, of course, but how did this stranger know about it? And more importantly, who was this well-dressed man, and why was he asking? Trevor, being the natural leader of the group, stepped forward. "Yes, sir. That was us. Is everything okay? Did something happen to Mr. Richardson?" The man smiled, which made the boys feel a little less nervous. "Mr. Richardson is fine, thank you for asking. Actually, he sent me here to find you. My name is David Collins, and I work for Mr. Richardson." Kyle couldn't help but ask the obvious question. "Work for him? What kind of work?" "Mr. Richardson is a businessman," David explained. "He owns several companies here in the city. Yesterday, when you helped him with his tire, you made quite an impression on him." Antonio was still confused. "But how did you find us? We just told him our first names and that we lived around here." David smiled again. "Mr. Richardson is a very resourceful man. He asked around at the community center where you play basketball. The staff there know you boys well, and they were happy to tell him what good young men you are." This information surprised all three friends. They hadn't realized that the adults at the community center paid that much attention to them, or that they had such a good reputation there. "Is Mr. Richardson in some kind of trouble?" Trevor asked. "I mean, why would he send someone to look for us just because we helped change his tire?" "Not trouble at all," David assured them. "Quite the opposite, actually. Mr. Richardson was so impressed by your kindness and your character that he'd like to meet with you again. He has something he'd like to discuss with all three of you." The boys looked at each other uncertainly. This was definitely not what they'd expected when they woke up that morning. Kyle was the first to voice what they were all thinking. "What kind of something?" "I think it would be better if Mr. Richardson explained that himself," David said diplomatically. "But I can tell you that it's nothing bad. In fact, it's quite the opposite." "Right now?" Antonio asked. "If you're available, yes. But of course, we'd need to get permission from your parents first." This was getting more mysterious by the minute. Trevor couldn't imagine why a businessman would want to meet with three teenagers just because they'd helped him change a tire. People helped strangers all the time, didn't they? "Permission for what exactly?" Trevor asked. "Mr. Richardson would like you to come to his office so he can thank you properly and discuss something important with you. It shouldn't take more than an hour or two." David reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, handing it to Trevor. The card was heavy and expensive looking, with gold lettering that read Richardson Industries, and listed David as executive assistant. "Richardson Industries?" Kyle read over Trevor's shoulder. "I've seen that name before." "You probably have," David said. "It's one of the largest companies in the state." This news made the three friends even more confused. If Mr. Richardson owned one of the largest companies in the state, what was he doing driving through their neighborhood by himself? And why had such an important person been so impressed by them changing his tire? "Look," David said, seeming to understand their confusion. "I know this all seems strange, but Mr. Richardson is a very genuine person who believes in recognizing good character when he sees it. What you boys did yesterday meant more to him than you probably realize." Trevor's mind was racing. Part of him was curious about what this important businessman could possibly want with them, but another part of him was worried. His mother had always taught him to be careful about situations that seemed too good to be true. "Can we call our parents first?" Trevor asked. "Of course," David said immediately. "In fact, I'd insist on it. Mr. Richardson has already spoken with the parents of several young people he's worked with before, so they know he's legitimate." This made Trevor feel a little better. If other parents had agreed to let their kids meet with Mr. Richardson, maybe this wasn't as strange as it seemed. "What exactly did he tell you to tell us?" Antonio asked. David thought for a moment before answering. "He told me to find 3 young men who showed exceptional character yesterday by helping a stranger without expecting anything in return. He said these young men were polite, hardworking, and refused payment for their good deed. He also said they were the kind of people he'd been looking for." "Looking for what?" Kyle asked. "That's something he'll need to explain himself," David said. "But I can promise you that his intentions are completely honorable, and that this meeting could be very beneficial for all of you." The 3 friends huddled together for a quick private conversation. They spoke in whispers, trying to decide what to do. "This is either really good or really weird," Kyle whispered. "Maybe both," Antonio added. Trevor looked back at David, who was waiting patiently beside his expensive SUV. "Okay, we'll call our parents. But if any of them say no, then we can't go." "That's perfectly reasonable," David agreed. "Take all the time you need." As the boys went inside to make their phone calls, they had no idea that this mysterious invitation would lead to the most important conversation of their young lives. The phone calls to their parents took longer than expected. Trevor's mom was at work but managed to take a quick break to talk. She sounded surprised and a little worried at first, but after David got on the phone and explained who he was, she seemed to calm down. Kyle's dad was more suspicious and asked a lot of questions, but eventually agreed after David gave him Mr. Richardson's direct phone number to verify everything. Antonio's grandmother, who took care of him while his parents worked, was the most cautious of all, but she finally said yes after speaking directly with Mr. Richardson himself. Within an hour, all 3 boys were sitting in the back of the luxurious SUV, watching their familiar neighborhood disappear behind them. The inside of the vehicle was unlike anything they'd ever experienced. The seats were made of soft leather. There were small screens built into the back of the front seats, and the ride was so smooth they could barely feel the road beneath them. David drove them through parts of the city they rarely visited. They passed through downtown with its tall office buildings and busy streets, then continued into an area where the buildings were newer and even taller. Finally, they pulled into the parking garage of a massive glass tower that seemed to stretch up forever. "Is this where Mr. Richardson works?" Kyle asked, craning his neck to see the top of the building. "This is Richardson Industries headquarters," David confirmed as he parked in a space marked executive parking. "Mr. Richardson's office is on the top floor." The boys had never been in a building this fancy. The lobby had marble floors, expensive looking, artwork on the walls, and a security desk with uniformed guards. People in business suits walked quickly across the polished floors, talking on phones or carrying important-looking briefcases. David led them to a bank of elevators, using a special key card to call one that went directly to the executive floors. As they rode up, Trevor watched the numbers climb, 10, 15, 20, 25. His stomach felt a little funny, and he wasn't sure if it was from the fast elevator or from nervousness about what was waiting for them at the top. When the elevator doors opened, on the 30th floor they stepped into a reception area that looked like something from a movie. The carpet was thick and spotless, the furniture looked expensive, and huge windows offered an amazing view of the entire city spread out below them. A friendly woman behind a large desk smiled at them. "Mr. Richardson is waiting for you in his office," she said to David, then looked at the 3 boys. "Can I get you anything to drink? Water, soda, juice?" The boys were too nervous to want anything, but they politely declined. David led them down a hallway lined with more artwork and finally stopped at a set of double doors made of dark wood. "Ready?" David asked, and without waiting for an answer, he knocked twice and opened the doors. The office they entered was bigger than most people's living rooms. One entire wall was made of windows, offering a view that seemed to go on forever. There were bookshelves filled with thick volumes, comfortable-looking chairs arranged around a coffee table, and a desk that looked like it cost more than most cars. But what caught their attention immediately was the man standing behind the desk. It was definitely Mr. Richardson from yesterday, but he looked completely different. Instead of the frustrated, sweaty man they'd helped with his flat tire, he now appeared confident and powerful. His suit was perfectly tailored, his gray hair was neatly styled, and he carried himself like someone who was used to being the most important person in the room. "Trevor, Kyle, Antonio," he said with a warm smile, walking around his desk to greet them. "Thank you so much for coming. Please, have a seat." He gestured toward the comfortable chairs, and the three boys sat down, still trying to process what they were seeing. This was the same man they'd helped yesterday, but the expensive office and obvious wealth made him seem like a completely different person. "I imagine you're wondering why I asked you here," Mr. Richardson said, taking a seat across from them. "And I'm sure you're curious about why I didn't mention yesterday that I own this company." Trevor found his voice first. "Yes, sir. We're pretty confused about all of this." Mr. Richardson nodded. "I understand completely. Let me explain. Yesterday, when my car broke down in your neighborhood, I was coming back from visiting a job site where we're building low-income housing. I often drive myself when I want to think, and I don't always take my usual car with the driver." He paused and looked at each of them. "When you three stopped to help me, I was honestly surprised. Do you know how many people drove past me before you came along?" The boys shook their heads. 7 cars, Mr. Richardson said. 7 people saw a man in trouble and decided it wasn't their problem. But you 3 teenagers, who clearly had less money than any of those other drivers, stopped to help a stranger. And when I tried to pay you, you refused." Kyle shifted in his chair. "It wasn't that big a deal, sir. Anyone would have done the same thing." "That's where you're wrong," Mr. Richardson said gently. "Not everyone would have done what you did. In fact, most people wouldn't have. What you showed me yesterday was something I don't see very often anymore. Genuine kindness without any expectation of reward." Antonio was still confused. "But why is that important to you? I mean, important enough to bring us all the way here?" Mr. Richardson stood up and walked to the big window, looking out at the city below. "Let me tell you a little about myself. 40 years ago, I was a lot like you 3. I grew up in a neighborhood not much different from yours. My family didn't have much money, and I had to work hard for everything I got." He turned back to face them. "When I was 17, I was walking home from my job at a grocery store when I saw an older woman struggling with a flat tire. Just like you did yesterday, I stopped to help. That woman turned out to be the wife of a man who owned several businesses in town." The boys were starting to understand where this story was going. That man was so impressed that a teenager would help his wife that he offered me a job. Not just any job, but a chance to learn his business from the ground up. That one act of kindness changed the entire course of my life. Mr. Richardson sat back down, leaning forward slightly. "I never forgot that lesson. Throughout my career, as I built this company, I always remembered that someone gave me a chance because I showed character, not because I had money or connections." "So you want to give us jobs?" Trevor asked. Mr. Richardson smiled. "Something like that. But much more important than just jobs. I want to give you opportunities. I want to invest in your futures because I believe in who you are as people." He reached for a folder on the coffee table and opened it. "I spent this morning learning about each of you. Trevor, you have excellent grades, and you're hoping for a college scholarship. Kyle, you're working part-time to help your family, but your teachers say you're one of the smartest students they've ever had. Antonio, you're interested in engineering and mechanics just like your father." The boys were amazed that he'd learned so much about them in such a short time. "Here's what I'm proposing," Mr. Richardson continued. "I want to offer each of you a full scholarship to the best preparatory school in the state. I want to provide college counseling, tutoring if you need it, and guaranteed funding for any university you can get into." The room was completely silent as the 3 friends tried to process what they'd just heard. "But there's more," Mr. Richardson said. "I also want to offer you summer internships here at my company, mentorship opportunities with successful professionals, and a chance to be part of my youth leadership program." Kyle was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. Mr. Richardson replied. But I want you to understand something important. This isn't charity. This is an investment. I'm investing in you because I believe you have the character and potential to become leaders someday, but with this opportunity comes responsibility. He looked at each of them seriously. If you accept this offer, I'll expect excellence from you in everything you do. I'll expect you to work hard, to treat others with respect, and someday, when you're successful, to help other young people the way I'm helping you today. The three boys sat in stunned silence, trying to understand how changing a tire had led to this incredible moment. Their lives had just been completely transformed, and they were still trying to believe it was real. The silence in Mr. Richardson's office stretched on for what felt like forever. Trevor, Kyle, and Antonio sat frozen in their chairs, staring at the successful businessman who had just offered to completely change their lives. The weight of his A&D words hung in the air like a heavy blanket, and none of them knew how to respond. Finally, Trevor cleared his throat. Mr. Richardson, sir, I think we need to make sure we understand what you're saying. You want to pay for us to go to private school and then college, all of us? That's exactly what I'm saying. Mr. Richardson confirmed, his voice calm and steady. Full tuition, books, supplies, everything you need to succeed academically. Kyle shook his head slowly, like he was trying to wake up from a dream. But why? I mean, we just changed your tire. People do that kind of thing every day. Do they? Mr. Richardson asked, raising an eyebrow. Think about it honestly. When was the last time you saw teenagers stop to help a stranger on the side of the road? When was the last time you saw anyone refuse payment for helping someone? Antonio shifted in his chair, still trying to process everything. This feels too good to be true. Things like this don't happen to people like us. Mr. Richardson's expression grew more serious. And that's exactly the problem I'm trying to solve. Good things should happen to good people, regardless of where they come from or how much money their families have. You three proved yesterday that you have something money can't buy. Character. He stood up and walked to a bookshelf, pulling out a thick photo album. Let me show you something, he said, returning to his seat and opening the album. The pages were filled with pictures of young people in graduation caps and gowns, at college campuses, in business suits, and at various celebration events. These are some of the other young people I've helped over the years, Mr. Richardson explained. There's Jennifer, who's now a doctor. Here's Robert, who became a teacher and is helping kids in his old neighborhood. This is Maria, who started her own business and employs 20 people. The boys leaned forward to look at the photos, seeing faces that looked like people from their own community, who had clearly gone on to achieve great things. Each of these young people showed me something special about their character, Mr. Richardson continued. Some helped elderly neighbors, others stood up to bullies, and a few, like you, helped strangers without expecting anything in return. I've been doing this for 15 years now, and I can honestly say it's the most rewarding thing I've ever done with my money. Trevor found himself thinking about his own dreams. He'd always wanted to go to college, but his family could barely afford to keep food on the table, let alone pay for higher education. The idea that someone would not only pay for college but also help him get the best preparation possible seemed impossible. What kind of school are we talking about? He asked. Mr. Richardson smiled, clearly pleased by the question. Riverside Preparatory Academy. It's about 20 minutes from your neighborhood, and it's where many of the city's most successful people send their children. The academic standards are extremely high, but so is the support system. Small class sizes, excellent teachers, and college counselors who have relationships with admissions officers at the best universities in the country. Kyle's mind was racing. He'd heard of Riverside Prep before. Kids from his neighborhood sometimes talked about it like it was another world, a place where rich kids went to guarantee their success in life. The idea that he could actually attend a school like that seemed unreal. What would we have to do? Kyle asked. I mean, what would you expect from us? Excellence, Mr. Richardson answered without hesitation. I'd expect you to take your studies seriously, to respect your teachers and classmates, and to remember that this opportunity comes with responsibility. You'd be representing not just yourselves, but also your families and your community. He leaned back in his chair. There would also be community service requirements. Part of the program involves giving back to others, just like someone is giving to you now. You'd spend time tutoring younger students, helping with community projects, and learning that success isn't just about what you achieve for yourself. Antonio had been quiet for most of the conversation, but now he spoke up. What about our families? I mean, this sounds amazing, but we can't just abandon where we come from. Mr. Richardson's face lit up. That's exactly the kind of thinking I was hoping to hear. No, you absolutely should not abandon your families or your community. In fact, part of the program is designed to help you stay connected to your roots, while expanding your opportunities. He pulled out another folder from the coffee table. The summer internship program would give you real work experience here at Richardson Industries and other partner companies. You'd learn about business, finance, engineering, medicine, law, whatever interests you most. But you'd also work on projects that benefit your own neighborhood. What kind of projects? Trevor asked, his curiosity overcoming his disbelief. We've had students help design and build new playground equipment for community centers, create tutoring programs for younger kids, organize job fairs for their neighbors, and even help small local businesses improve their operations. The goal is to use what you learn to make your community stronger. The three friends exchanged glances. This was starting to sound less like charity and more like a real opportunity to make a difference, not just for themselves, but for everyone they cared about. Can we think about it? Antonio asked. Of course, Mr. Richardson said immediately. This is a big decision, and I wouldn't expect you to answer right now. Take all the time you need to discuss it with your families. Ask questions, do research, make sure you understand what you're committing to. He handed each of them a business card with his direct phone number. Call me anytime, day or night, if you have questions or concerns. I want you to be completely comfortable with this decision. Kyle looked at the business card in his hand, still struggling to believe this was really happening. Mr. Richardson, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever regret helping people like us? I mean, what if we don't live up to your expectations? What if we fail? Mr. Richardson was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. You know, in 15 years of doing this, I've had a few disappointments. Young people who didn't take advantage of the opportunity, or who got caught up in things they shouldn't have. But you want to know something? Even those few cases taught me something valuable. He looked directly at Kyle. The young people who didn't succeed, it wasn't because they were bad people or because they came from poor families. It was because they lost sight of the values that got them the opportunity in the first place. They forgot about kindness, hard work, and helping others. Trevor nodded, understanding what Mr. Richardson was saying. But the success stories far outweigh the disappointments, Mr. Richardson continued. And based on what I saw from you three yesterday, I'm not worried about your character. You have something special, something that can't be taught in any classroom. As the meeting began to wind down, Mr. Richardson walked them to the window overlooking the city. Look out there, he said. This city needs good leaders, people who remember where they came from and who care about making things better for others. I believe you three could be those leaders someday. The boys stood at the window looking out at the sprawling city below, trying to imagine themselves as part of the business world they could see spread out before them. There's one more thing, Mr. Richardson said as they prepared to leave. If you decide to accept this opportunity, you'll be joining a family. All the young people I've helped stay in touch with each other and with me. You'll have mentors, friends, and a support system that will last for the rest of your lives. As David prepared to drive them home, the three friends knew their lives had just taken a turn they never could have imagined. The question now was whether they were brave enough to take the leap into a future they had never dared to dream possible. 3 months had passed since that life-changing meeting in Mr. Richardson's office, and Trevor, Kyle, and Antonio were still adjusting to their new reality. The decision to accept his offer hadn't been easy. There had been long family discussions, sleepless nights, and plenty of doubts about whether they truly belonged in a world so different from the one they'd always known. The hardest part had been the reactions from some people in their neighborhood. While their families and close friends were thrilled about the opportunity, not everyone understood or supported their decision. Some neighbors whispered that the boys thought they were too good for their community now. Others questioned whether they'd earned such an incredible chance or if they were just lucky. But as Trevor adjusted his new school tie for what felt like the 100th time that morning, he reminded himself why they'd said yes. This wasn't about leaving their old life behind. It was about gaining the tools to make that life better for everyone. Riverside Preparatory Academy was everything Mr. Richardson had promised, and more. The campus looked like something from a movie, with brick buildings covered in ivy, perfectly maintained lawns, and students who carried themselves with a confidence that came from knowing they belonged in prestigious places. The first few weeks had been the hardest. Trevor, Kyle, and Antonio quickly realized that most of their new classmates came from families where college was assumed, not hoped for. These students talked casually about family vacations to Europe, summer homes, and parents who were doctors, lawyers, and business executives. "Did you guys understand anything Professor Williams said about advanced calculus today?" Kyle whispered to his friends as they sat together at lunch. Even though they'd been at Riverside for months now, they still preferred to eat together rather than trying to break into the established social groups. "About half of it," Trevor admitted, picking at his salad. The food at Riverside was definitely better than what they'd had at their old school, but sometimes he missed the simple lunches his mom used to pack for him. Antonio nodded in agreement. "Good thing we have those tutoring sessions twice a week. I never thought I'd need help with math, but this stuff is on a whole different level." The academic challenge was intense, but it wasn't the hardest part of their transition. The hardest part was feeling like they constantly had to prove they deserved to be there. Some classmates were friendly and welcoming, but others made it clear through subtle comments and looks that they viewed the three friends as outsiders who didn't really belong. "Hey, Trevor," called out a voice from across the cafeteria. It was Brandon, one of the students from their chemistry class. He was walking over with two other boys, and from their expressions, Trevor could tell this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. "I heard you got your spot here through some kind of charity program," Brandon said loud enough for other students to hear. "That must be nice, having everything handed to you while the rest of us actually had to earn our way in." Trevor felt his face get hot with anger, but he remembered Mr. Richardson's advice about handling difficult situations with dignity. "We earned our spot just like everyone else," he said calmly. "We're here because we work hard, and because someone believed in our potential." "Sure you are," Brandon smirked. "I bet you'll be gone by Christmas when you realize you can't keep up with real students." Before Trevor could respond, Kyle stood up from the table. "You want to see who can't keep up? Check the grade postings tomorrow. All three of us are in the top 10% of our class." This was true. Despite the challenges and the extra effort required, Trevor, Kyle, and Antonio had thrown themselves into their studies with determination that surprised even their teachers. They stayed up late completing assignments, attended every tutoring session available, and pushed each other to excel. Brandon looked surprised by Kyle's confident response, but he wasn't ready to back down. "Grades are one thing, but do you really think you'll fit in when we go to college? Do you think Harvard or Yale is going to accept kids from your neighborhood?" "We'll find out, won't we?" Antonio said, standing up to join his friends. "But I'm pretty sure they care more about what we can accomplish than where we came from." The confrontation ended when a teacher approached, but it wasn't the last time the three friends would face questions about whether they truly belonged in their new environment. That evening, Trevor called Mr. Richardson. It had become a weekly tradition, these check-in calls where he could talk honestly about the challenges they were facing. "How are you handling the pressure?" Mr. Richardson asked after Trevor had described the cafeteria incident. "Some days are harder than others," Trevor admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if we made the right choice. It would be easier to just go back to our old school where we fit in." "I understand that feeling," Mr. Richardson said. "When I first started working in the business world, I felt like an outsider every single day. I questioned whether I deserved the opportunities I'd been given, and I wondered if I'd ever truly belong." "How did you get through it?" "By remembering why I was there and what I wanted to accomplish, and by proving to myself, not to anyone else, that I could succeed." "Trevor, you're not at Riverside to make friends with kids like Brandon. You're there to get the best education possible so you can make a difference in the world. These conversations always helped Trevor feel more centered and focused on what really mattered. The turning point came in November during the school's annual community service project. Each class was required to organize and complete a project that would benefit the local community. Most classes chose safe, easy projects like organizing food drives or cleaning up parks. But Trevor, Kyle, and Antonio had a different idea. What if we organized a college preparation workshop for kids from our old neighborhood? Trevor suggested during their class planning meeting. We could teach them about applications, financial aid, and scholarship opportunities. Some of their classmates looked skeptical. Do you think kids from that area would even be interested in college? Asked one girl. Absolutely, Kyle said firmly. They just need someone to show them it's possible and help them understand the steps to get there. The three friends worked tirelessly to organize the workshop. They reached out to their old teachers, contacted community leaders, and even convinced several Riverside faculty members to volunteer their time. Mr. Richardson provided funding for materials and refreshments. The day of the workshop, over 60 middle and high school students from their old neighborhood showed up. Trevor, Kyle, and Antonio led sessions on study skills, college applications, and scholarship opportunities. They shared their own story about how helping a stranger had led to incredible opportunities, and they emphasized that success comes from character and hard work, not just luck. 3 months ago, we were sitting where you are now, Antonio told the group of younger students. We thought college was something for other people with more money or better connections, but we learned that if you're willing to work hard and treat others with respect, opportunities will come. The workshop was such a success that the local newspaper wrote an article about it. Several Riverside classmates who had initially been skeptical about the three friends began to see them in a new light. Brandon, the boy who had challenged them in the cafeteria, even approached Trevor afterward to apologize and ask if he could help with future community projects. As the school year continued, Trevor, Kyle, and Antonio found their place at Riverside Preparatory Academy. They maintained their excellent grades, participated in extracurricular activities, and began to develop friendships with classmates who respected their dedication and authenticity. But more importantly, they never forgot where they came from or why they were there. Every weekend, they returned to their neighborhood to tutor younger kids, help with community projects, and serve as examples of what was possible when you combined hard work with opportunity. Mr. Richardson's investment in 3 teenagers who had simply done the right thing by helping a stranger was paying dividends far beyond what anyone had imagined. The boys were not only succeeding academically, but they were also becoming the kind of leaders their community needed. As Trevor looked back on that hot afternoon when they'd stopped to help change a tire, he realized that the smallest acts of kindness really could change everything. They had helped one person for a few minutes, and in return, their entire futures had been transformed. Now it was their turn to pass that kindness forward, one person at a time.